Sir, and thank you very much to the ladies and gentlemen from the media for making themselves available today. I'm joined on this press conference by the chairperson of KwaZulu-Natal, Dean McPherson. I'm joined by Hanif Hussein, MP, Mergen Chetty, MP, and the leader of KwaZulu-Natal, Mr. Francois Rogers, who joins us via Zoom. I flew into KwaZulu-Natal this morning at 8 a.m. to be able to assess for myself the situation on the ground here and to be able to interact with the communities that have been affected by the widespread violence that has broken out over the course of the last 48 hours here in Durban. And I must be honest, the scenes that I was expecting were nothing like what I was met with. And it is really quite terrifying to see the absolute devastation, the complete destruction, but also the despair of many of the communities here who feel completely abandoned by the security services and who have been left to fend for themselves, driving into areas where buildings have been burnt down, in parts of Phoenix where bodies are literally strewn, lying in the road. This is clearly a situation that is not under control, and something needs to be done urgently to bring the situation under control because it's not getting any better. In the entire time that I've been out, I've not come across a single member of the SANDF in any of these communities or any of the sites that we visited. I've not come across very many SAPS, and it does seem to be a completely uncoordinated approach to dealing with the situation here on the ground. And this is, I think, is what's largely behind this escalation that we're seeing here in KwaZulu-Natal. And my real fear is that if we don't contain the situation here in KwaZulu-Natal, this is going to spread like wildfire around the rest of the country. So despite the president's tough words yesterday evening, it hasn't been matched with tough action here on the ground, and the looting and the intimidation and the damage to property and damage to people's lives and livelihoods continues as if nothing said last night has had any impact whatsoever. I'm also told the police are running out of rubber bullets and tear gas, that the other supply chain is very difficult for them to get the keys necessary, that they are completely understaffed and overstretched, which makes it very important that strong action is taken. I can also announce from KwaZulu-Natal here that having seen this devastation on the ground, I've instructed our Shadow Minister of Justice, Mrs. Glynis Breitenbach, Member of Parliament, to set about laying charges of incitement to violence against Duduzane Zuma, Duduzile Zuma, as well as the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, who on social media are very clearly sending out tweets and social media posts that appear to be inciting the violence. This is a time when leaders should be doing what they can to calm supporters, to be able to calm the situation on the ground, not inflame them. And the situation that started out as a internal ANC factional battle, then spilt onto the streets of South Africa, and has now been engulfed by a toxic mix of criminal behavior, but also some race behavior that we're seeing break out in parts of the province. And if this situation is not calmed down, if leaders don't get down here on the ground and start to do what they can to assess the situation, but also to calm their supporters, I really do fear for what is going to be a massive escalation over the coming days, one in which it's going to be devastating to recover from. One of the sites that I visited was the Cornubia Presidential Lead Project, which focused on attracting international investors into the Cornubia Business Park, which would then feed jobs into the surrounding areas. The shopping center is completely looted and is busy burning as we speak. Factories, warehouses have been attacked and looted and set alight. In one of the key distribution centers in the Riverhorse Valley site, warehouses have been set alight, looted, and all this is continuing as we speak. So it's very clear that there's no containment yet, and police and law enforcement and the security service have not yet regained the initiative here in KwaZulu-Natal, and they're not going to be able to unless there's a massive injection of more boots on the ground. Now, the president announced last night that the SANDF would be deployed. We're told that the entire deployment for the whole country is only 2,500 SANDF personnel. This is not going to be anywhere near enough. If one looks at a shift system, that means that the impact of only 600 odd military personnel on the streets to assist the SAPS in performing the law and order and public protection function is not going to be sufficient. And I think that the president's going to have to very urgently relook at that deployment and find SANDF personnel to be able to send in here to boost. Added to that, I think that he's going to have to very quickly look at how they can marshal police resources from other provinces that are not yet affected to be able to come in here and assist the SAPS and the South African National Defence Force to be able to protect life and property and law and order here in KwaZulu-Natal. The other problem that has become very obvious being on the ground here is the fact that there's going to be a food security problem shortly. Already there are massive problems with food supply. Bakeries have been burnt and raided. Shops have had all their stock stolen. And so citizens are struggling to be able to get basic foodstuffs. And my real worry is that as people realize that there is a lack of food, that the situation gets even more desperate and leads to even more criminal behavior breaking out as people then start coming out to look for food. And if the shops aren't there anymore and they've already been looted, they will look at other sites to be able to start looting to get access to food. Fuel is also running out very, very quickly. Many of the service stations are torched, are closed. Residents are not able to be able to get fuel supplies. And then many of these communities are standing alone. Literally, I visited with communities in the north of Durban today where they've had no assistance from the SAPS or any policing services, and it is them against hordes of armed and violent looters. And they are literally what stands between now their community being completely destroyed and overrun and their families' lives threatened, and being able to keep their families safe. It is really a desperate situation on the ground here in KwaZulu-Natal, and I would urge the president and ministers of the security cluster to get on the ground here, because you really cannot truly appreciate how devastating and what is actually going on here unless you've actually walked those streets and you've actually gone to visit these sites and witnessed the lawlessness that is simply continuing. Trucks pushed over onto the side of the road, looted, trucks burnt, private property destroyed. It is all still carrying on here in Durban. One of the sites that we were stopped at, we had to leave as there was as shooting breaking out. So it is really a dangerous situation here on the ground in KwaZulu-Natal, and law and order has not yet been restored. So I think we're going to also need to have crime intelligence playing a far bigger role in infiltrating some of the WhatsApp groups and social media directives that have been given. People are being able to give direction and to decide where to go loot based on WhatsApp messages, on messages on other social media platforms. Crime intelligence needs to get on top of those because what that'll do is allow them to be able to target and focus limited resources into a specific area, knowing that it is potentially going to be targeted. Then I think there needs to be a far bigger coordination going on between the SAPS, the SANDF, the Metro Police Services, where these are applicable in KwaZulu-Natal, and then also private security. In many of the communities, it is the private security companies that are providing that thin blue line, essentially between absolute lawlessness and people being held safe. And so I think there needs to be far greater coordination. It's very clear that everyone is operating in silos. There's haphazard interaction on the ground, and nobody's talking to each other. And this is leading to, I believe, a misuse of resources that could be focused like a laser beam on being at those areas where they are the greatest risk. And then we obviously also need to make sure that the SANDF know what they need to do. And one of the things they could be doing is helping to stand point where and providing some assistance to the residents in these communities who have not slept now for almost 48 hours. and are too afraid to go back into their homes for fear that the moment they break the point in their community, they're going to be overrun. So all in all, a very, very desperate situation here that calls on far greater action than what we've seen to date. Whatever's being done now is not cutting it. It's not getting to the heart of it. And it's not bringing law and order back in. And unless that's done quickly, as I said, this is going to ignite the tinderbox that is inequality and dispossession around the rest of South Africa. And the scenes that have played out in KwaZulu-Natal are going to be repeated thousands of times over in towns and cities around the country, making any hope of what the president called building last night virtually impossible, and really destroying any investor confidence that we had left in South Africa, particularly as those Conubia sites see huge foreign investments going up in smoke, unlikely to be renewed, unlikely to be built up again. So all in all, a very, very bleak situation on the ground here in KwaZulu-Natal. I'm really calling on the president to get his boots on the ground, to come and see for himself, to be able to interact with communities as I've done today, to understand the devastation that is caused. Perhaps the most heartbreaking moment for me was a shop owner in Verulam, a young woman who had invested her entire life into her shop and all her money into her shop, completely looted, broken up and destroyed, and has left her completely devastated. And it's going to be impossible for her to rebuild. So these are the scenes that are played out hundreds of times over across the length and breadth of the province of KwaZulu-Natal. I'm going to hand over now to Francois Rogers to give an update on what's happening in Pietermaritzburg. And then I hand over to Mergen Chetty and Hanif Hussein and Dean McPherson to be able to give input there. And we'll obviously then take questions. Thanks.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon to ladies and gents of the media. Pietermaritzburg is very similar to what you experienced in Durban today. In fact, the majority of the malls in Umzinduzi have all but been destroyed. And now, in fact, the anarchy has moved wider to start attacking warehousing and storage facilities in Pietermaritzburg. But John, I'd like to just talk a little bit about leadership, or the lack thereof, in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. I requested a meeting with the Premier and the other political leaders in the province, and the Premier acceded to that and had a meeting last night. Well, let me tell you that the Premier Sihle Zigalala, is clearly out of touch with reality. He was like a rabbit caught in the headlights last night. He was dazed, he was frozen, and he didn't know which way. Quite frankly, as the leader of the province, he has shown absolutely no understanding of the situation on the ground. He very simply gave us a background as to how this had arisen, which we all understand. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to work that out. But when it came to addressing the problem, all he could tell us was that the SANDF would be employed and everything would itself. In fact, I think the situation will solve itself, which clearly shows two things. He's either out of touch with reality, or there's perhaps something more sinister behind the violence and the anarchy that's actually taking place in our province. I put some questions to the Premier, and I asked questions, as you said, John, that currently there's no tear gas, there's no bullets, there's no rubber bullets. There's been no use of any water in trying to curb these. And I put these questions to him, and his response was, they noted. He never gave me an answer. I asked him, how many SAPs do you have around at the moment? What is the number of SANDF troops that you're expecting on the ground to come and assist SAPs? His response was, it's noted. I can't give you those figures. When I asked him where his ME of Safety and Security is, Peggy Nkonyeni, who, as ENCA so rightly said, appears to be sleeping at the wheel, again, he said, your question is noted. None of the questions that I put to the Premier did he at any stage attempt to answer. Now, if you had a premier who was on top of his game and had a solution, he would have put that solution across to all the leaders of the political in the province. He was absolutely in no position to do that. We have to say to ourselves here, this is a failure on behalf of the leadership of the ANC in the province, number one. Number two, there's a possibility that, as I said earlier, there's something more sinister. Because surely the intelligence services, crime intelligence that we have, would have given some indication that this would unfold and was going to. I mean, you only have to follow social media, Facebook, WhatsApp, to be able to gain that intelligence and to see. He was absolutely unaware of what was happening on the ground. In fact, during our very meeting, the legislature, the provincial legislature precinct, was under attack from buildings that had been set alight in Pietermaritzburg. Yet he felt that this would solve itself and it'll all be very shortly. We have a leadership failure, and I think we have an ANC failure. It's really time that we look at alternates when it comes to leadership and solving this problem. We cannot allow this to continue. We cannot allow law and order to collapse and affect the ordinary citizens of our province who are law-abiding. It's unacceptable. And then, as you said, John, the consequences of this are yet to be determined. Food security, medical security is going to become a problem. We haven't seen the end of this yet, and we're not going to see it under the existing leadership in our province. Thank you.
Thanks, Francois. Hanif and Mergen, and then Dean.
Yeah, friends, thank you very much. May I just use the opportunity just to perhaps maybe just share with you some of the experiences in my own community and the constituency that I've been involved in the last few days now. And the one thing that I want to really share with you is what's actually going on behind the scenes that you often don't get to see on the television screens. And you can imagine that the community that I come from, which is largely Indian community, and them seeing these images on the TV and experiencing the ongoing looting for days on end with very little, in some cases, absolutely no support from the law enforcement agencies, they are now starting to take the law into their own hands. And over the last 2 days now, communities have been rallying together and blocking off their streets, protecting their homes, because they clearly are concerned about what happens next after the looting of the supermarkets and the warehouses are complete. And fathers and brothers and sons are completely exhausted. Many of them have not slept for days on end now. They're fearful, they're anxious, and they are arming themselves. So my greatest fear is, unless we're going to get a massive deployment of extra security personnel, especially in these suburbs, the bodies are going to start piling up because people are fearful and anxious. And there's already been a number of incidents where suspected looters have been dealt with by the communities because they've lost all hopes that the police can actually protect them. So in that type of situation, I'm afraid there's going to be absolute anarchy. And if we think the looting is bad, my greatest fear, as I've pointed out to my provincial leader and our federal leader, is that if we're not going to see a greater and faster deployment of security personnel in a matter of hours, especially in the Phoenix community, the bodies are going to start piling up, especially when it gets dark. And people are really, really anxious and fearful in those areas. And the slightest spark, I'm afraid, is going to turn into a massive raging fire. And if that happens, it's going to be very difficult for the security forces to be able to control. But I'm not going to repeat anything that both John and Francois had mentioned to you, and I'll be happy to maybe share any other experiences if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Mergen and then Dean.
Thank you, Leader, and good afternoon to the press. Yeah, similar to Hanif, I'm also a constituency head for Chatsworth, which is predominantly of an Indian area. The tragedy during all of this is that the shopping centers are in the center of the residential areas, and thereby tragically, once the looting is happening, the residents themselves are losing faith that if the SAPs cannot protect the business houses, what guarantee do they have for their safety? And therefore, unfortunately, residents themselves have had no option but to protect their property, protect their families. Also, the looting. The real tragedy is that just looting, people can come back from. The destruction in which those shopping malls are now being burnt to the ground is going to have a far more deeper consequences to the economy than just the looting part. I think right now the people on the ground are crying out. The president did say that they were going to be deploying the SANDF, and everyone is asking us, where are the soldiers? And I think if and when they do arrive, it's going to be too little, too late. We have had business houses who have also risen through and have pleaded at SAPs to come out and protect their businesses. Unfortunately, the response has been that even SAPs has now run out of ammunition and they cannot protect anyone, not even themselves. The tragedy is that now it's the communities who are having to assist SAPs, including with ammunition. Furthermore, I think it is a state where the residents have no option. It is anarchy. And if this situation is not going to be controlled sooner rather than later, we are going to be heading in for much, much more dangerous times. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I just want to just give some perspective on the devastating economic consequences that are being felt in our province and in our South Africa, in South Africa. I've had discussions with a number of FDI facilitators, foreign direct investors facilitators based overseas, and they have told me that the international investment picture towards South Africa is absolutely grim at the moment. That investors never thought that this was possible, and they're seeing it play out, unfortunately, on international news channels as well. So this is what's going on right now, and for every day that this continues is going to have a mounting economic cost in our country, which is only going to exacerbate the yawning unemployment numbers in general unemployment and youth unemployment. So it's absolutely critical that we regain law and order in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng to stem the loss of investor confidence in South Africa. What we saw in Cornubia today was truly extraordinary. I don't live too far from Cornubia, and I've watched the entire development go up. It was a special presidential project. There were many international investors. There were many domestic investors. Reliability, who were the people with the backing of government, rescued and bought Edgar's. Their depot that they invested hundreds of millions of rands have gone up in flames, and there are uncontrolled fires and destruction of property in that entire precinct, and the SAPS are unable to do anything about it. So should anyone want to return or invest, they literally will have to start from scratch again, because there is nothing left in that entire precinct, which housed some very big investors in South Africa and in KwaZulu-Natal. Also just want to say that, it is impossible for the economic cluster in government to be as silent as they are. The economy is taking a hammering through the pandemic, and now we have the exacerbated situation of looting that is taking place throughout the country. And this will only add to our unemployment numbers. It will only add to disinvestment, and that's just something that we cannot afford at the moment. So it's crucial that the president comes to this province, to KwaZulu-Natal. He comes and assesses the damage, of course, in the communities, but he also comes and assesses the damage in the business districts. If you go to the River Horse Valley and you go to Queen Andy Drive, there are many massive warehouses, including Mr. Price warehouse that is located there. It has been totally set on fire. There is nothing left. And these looters were all arriving in their own private vehicles. And there were hundreds of them last night. And nothing, there was no law enforcement. So I really want to urge the economic cluster to start speaking up and to reiterate John's call that the president needs to get on the ground into KZN, into Durban urgently, and understand what is going on as a matter of urgency. Thanks.